Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Meet the Author event today. We have a wonderful panel of authors to introduce to you today. And I just have to say, before we get started, this project was made possible in part by the Institute of Museum and Library Services. And I'm just going to go ahead and bring on all our authors on, and we'll get the thing started. You are welcome to ask questions of the authors today, so feel free to do that in the comments as we go along, and we'll answer them at the end of the program. So please welcome all of the authors.
Hi, everyone, and good evening. My name is Carmen Alvarez, and I would like to welcome everyone to the Orange County Library System's Meet the Authors panel celebrating Hispanic Heritage Month. I am so honored to have 5 wonderful Latinx and Hispanic authors with us tonight. And I'll tell you a little bit about myself, and then I'm going to have all the authors introduce themselves. I'll just very briefly, if you guys want to wave when I call out your name: Alexandra Alessandri, Priscilla Oliveras, Angel Luis Colón, Jenny Torres Sanchez, and Adriana Cuevas. My name is Carmen, like I said, and I am a Cuban American book influencer. I'm based in Tampa, Florida, and I write book reviews and take pictures of books on Instagram. My Instagram handle is Tomes and Textiles. I'll be moderating the discussion tonight, and the first thing I'd like to do is to welcome our authors and have each of them take a moment to introduce themselves as well as tell us about their books. Would you like to kick us off, Alexandra?
I had a feeling you were going to say that. Hi, everyone. I'm Alexandra Alessandri, and I am the author of 2 picture books. So there's Feliz New Year, Eva Gabriela, illustrated by Adi Rivera Sonda and published by Albert Whitman this past October last year, almost a year ago. And then Isabel and Her Colores Go to School, which just released in July, illustrated by Courtney Dawson and published by Sleeping Bear Press. I also just had the middle grade announced a week ago roughly, which I'm really excited about. It is a middle grade fantasy set in Colombia. I am Colombian American, and yeah, so that's me.
Thank you so much, Alexandra. Priscilla, would you like to go next?
Sure. Hola, everyone. I am Priscilla Oliveras. I write contemporary romance with a Latinx flavor, basically meaning usually I like to write series books. So they're standalones, but there will be like one main familia that's featured. So all the siblings will each have their own story. And so my most recent series is the Keys to Love series. It's set in Key West, where I grew up, spent my adolescence and college years. When I would go back home, and early married life, I would go back home to Key West. And my most recent book in that is Anchored Hearts. It released in May. It's book 2 in the series. And the series features the Navarro familia. They're a Cuban American familia. The kids have all been born and raised in Key West. My mommy's from Puerto Rico. My papi is from San Antonio, so he's Tex-Mex. So in our casa, we grew up kind of like a mix, but to be more true to the larger Latinx population in Key West, the Navarro familia is Cuban American. And so Anchored Hearts is a second chance romance, high school sweethearts. The hero of the story is kind of a prodigal son, had a big rift with his father, so he left. He's been gone for 12 years, and he's dragged back home because of an injury, and he reunites with Ana Maria Navarro. She's the sister in the Navarro familia, and she's kind of the one who got away. They kind of let each other get away, and so it's their second chance romance. And because small island town, also Latinx familia, they're a lot like his mom's, a lot like my mommy. So meddling mommies are involved and all of that. So it's a way to kind of celebrate a Latinx culture. And I'm really proud to be part of the small but mighty and growing Latinx romance community that's out there.
Wonderful, Priscilla. Thank you so much. Adriana, would you like to go next?
Sure. So I'm Adriana Cuevas. I grew up in Miami, but now I live in Austin, Texas, and I write books for middle grade readers, so like 4th through 7th grade. My first book was The Total Eclipse of Nestor Lopez that came out last year, and it won a Pura Belpre honor this year, so I was really happy for that. And then I just released a book Tuesday, Cuba in My Pocket, which is a historical fiction that I based on my dad and his immigration experience coming in the 1960s as a Pedro Pan from Santa Clara to Miami. And so I'm really excited to have that come out just a few days ago, still recovering from that. But yeah, so I am a former teacher. I taught for 16 years Spanish and ESL. And so one of my favorite parts of being an author is getting back into schools and getting to do school visits, mostly virtually these days. But I still love talking to students about books.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Adriana. Jenny, would you like to go next?
Sure. Thank you. My name's Jenny Torres Sanchez, and I am a young adult author. I write for teenagers. I have several young adult novels out, but my latest one is We Are Not From Here, which is right up there. And it is the story of 3 migrants from Guatemala who are trying to get to Mexico so that they can board the series of trains known as La Bestia to seek asylum and refuge in the United States. It's an incredibly dangerous journey. And this book just kind of, chronicles exactly what they go through and the dangers that they face, the dangers they face, the reasons they're leaving, and the great sacrifice it is to leave everything they've loved behind. It was a Pura Belpre honor book as well, so I was really proud of that. And I have a picture book coming out next year, my first picture book ever, and it's called With Lots of Love, Con Mucho Amor. It's coming out in English and in Spanish in February of 2022.
Wonderful, Jenny. Thank you so much. And last but certainly not least, Anwar.
Hi, thanks everybody. My name is Angel Luis Colón, Puerto Rican, from the Bronx, not born but raised. My latest project actually wasn't so much writing as editing. I edited an anthology for called Pa que tú lo sepas. It was fiction from Latina authors, specifically to help out the folks in Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria, which was a wonderful project, and it was invigorating and eye-opening. We were nominated for a couple of awards. One of the stories in the anthology by Alex Segura called Red Zone was actually the winner of the Anthony Award for Best Short Story for last year, which is a huge honor. And I'm also a novelist. I've written a bunch of novels. The last one called Hell Chose Me, about a criminal who was haunted by his past.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. It's so nice to get to know you all and see how diverse our Hispanic heritage actually is, how everyone comes from so many different backgrounds, and yet we all have this one identity that we're a part of. And what I'm wondering is, can you tell me about the first time you saw your identity represented on the page of a book and what that felt like for you? I don't know. Jenny, I'm trying to mix it up a little bit, not go in the same order every time. Jenny, could you go first?
I keep forgetting to unmute myself. Sorry. Absolutely. So, growing up, unfortunately, I did not see myself very much in the pages in regards to my cultures and my traditions. I did see myself in the pages regarding feeling like an outsider. All my life I felt very much like an outsider, like one of the kids on the fringes. So those books certainly resonated with me. But my real experience, what my life was like at home, what my parents were like, the kinds of rules that they had, the traditions that they kind of brought in from the old country, the things that I really felt were very just singular in my house and nobody understood when I stepped outside of my house. That's why my bio says that I lived on the border of 2 worlds, because it's always felt like I've had a foot in 2 different places. I didn't see that growing up, and I wish that I had. I feel like it would have made such a difference. And I didn't read anything from a Latinx author. I think it wasn't until college. And it was when I took a class called, like ethnic literature. And it was a bunch of different, countries and different authors from different countries. It wasn't singular, just, Latinx or Central American or Mexican or Cuban or anything like that. It was just this singular class that kind of was this hodgepodge of everything. So yeah, I came to it, like seeing that very late. I think it was with Judith Ortiz Kofer, Silent Dancing. And it was one of the first times that I was like, wait, this is like, I know what this is. I know exactly what she's talking about here. So I'm glad that we're seeing more books for young readers, from picture books up to young adult novels. I think it's fantastic. I think we've made some progress, and I think that we still have a lot more to go.
Agreed. Adriana, would you like to go next and talk about your experiences seeing yourself on the page?
Sure. I think for me, growing up as a Cuban American in Miami, you see your identity everywhere around you. So the fact that you're not seeing it in books isn't quite as, it's not such an experience, because my food was everywhere. My music was on the radio. People who looked like me were in places of power. And so I didn't feel that lack, that I wasn't seeing my experiences, my family, like Jenny was saying, people who talked like me, parents who had the same roles on the page. And so I think I was much older. Like the books I'm about to mention to you are not, these are recent books, but these two books were the first time that I just felt like this gut punch of, oh, this is what I could have had this whole time. Because I went to college in the Midwest, and that was the very first time I felt like a minority, in all honesty, because I didn't feel like one growing up in Miami. And so when I read Don't Date Rosa Santos by Nina Moreno, and then when I read Sal and Gabby Break the Universe by Carlos Hernandez, so one YA and one middle grade, I am fairly certain that I started screaming around my house multilingual expletives, because I just was so excited. And then I thought back that, like, growing up, if I had read books like that showed, these people talked like me, they had families like mine. I just can't imagine what that would have been probably for like my childhood and everything, because I didn't have that growing up, and obviously got that much, much later in life, because these are not old books that I'm talking about. And so, I just think of kids these days, and I'm so excited that there are more books that show their experiences and show their life experiences and who they are on the page, because I didn't have that growing up. I didn't think I needed it growing up until I found it and realized what I was lacking.
I love that so much. Angel, would you like to go next?
Sure. So growing up in the Bronx, there wasn't much at all. I have the privilege of being a light-skinned Latina male. So, there's plenty of things that I could project onto, right? I could project onto adventure stories and all that stuff. But to see my actual cultural heritage reflected was non-existent. It just wasn't there. You kind of, as a Puerto Rican, you run towards anything that might have a Puerto Rican in it. I remember specifically Carlito's Way when I was a kid, right? That was like, oh my God, it's Al Pacino once again, pretending to be Latino. Movie about Puerto Ricans with no Puerto Ricans. But you're desperate for some kind of validation in media. But as for reading, it wasn't until college that I even knew we were allowed to really be a part of literature. I was exposed to a lot of poetry. I was a frequent visitor to the New Yorican Cafe, so poetry became a big part of my life. I got introduced to Pablo Neruda and a lot of others that really broke my brain. I didn't know. I had no idea that we were capable of that kind of beauty, especially in our language. But then my genre, I never was necessarily exposed to anybody until I started writing. So until I, got into the scene and learned about writers like Alex Segura, Richie Narvaez, Gabino Iglesias, Cine Pelayo, I had no idea that it was out there. And it was, I'm in my 40s now, so this is in my 30s. It was eye-opening. It was mind-breaking to not only see our people writing and writing in, spec lit but to kind of see stories that not necessarily reflect us entirely, but to see stories that reflect our cultural beliefs, to reflect kind of like those little nuances, right? That nobody necessarily understands. Abuelita stuff, just those things that make you smile. That was huge, and it took a long time to get there.
I'm seeing a trend here, but Priscilla, would you like to go next?
Sure. I grew up as a military brat. Papi was in the Navy. That's how from San Antonio he made his way to Puerto Rico and met my mom. So living on military bases, there is diversity. We were active in like the Hispanic club and all that. So I maybe similar to Adriana, I didn't ever feel like other. I read a lot. As a kid growing up, but I don't remember feeling like something was missing. I will tell you. Just with regards to romance, like my early books sucked and they're bad for like a lot of reasons, but I truly believe that part of that was what I was doing back then is the same thing I tell my own students now, like study the books that are on the shelf, study the books that are there, so learn from them. And so the stories that I were telling did not have Latinos, did not have, in the leads, because that's not what I was seeing. It was not until the late 90s. So now I'm dating myself, talking about aging. Pero Kensington, who happened to later become the publisher of my debut series and the Keys to Love series, Kensington had a line called the Encanto line, and they were all Latinx leads. And actually the books, like if you picked up the book, it was in English here, and then when you flipped it over, it was the same cover, sorry, I start to go to Spanish, sorry, but all in Spanish. And it was like the book repeated, but in Spanish. And that was the first time that I can remember picking up a book and like, ay Dios mío, like this is my people, this is me or my cousin or my sister. And the very next book that I started writing had like the heroine was Latinx. And then the next one. And sure, yes, I had been writing, so I want to say my craft had been improving, but that first book that had Latinx characters is the first book of mine. It didn't sell, but it's the first one that finaled like in a national contest. And I think it was mainly because I was finally writing the stories that I wanted to tell. Like I had somehow been like given permission or realized like, why am I like cutting off this part of me that wanted, that wanted to be telling these stories. So there were authors like, and the Encanto line was only around for a couple of years, unfortunately. But it was like Laura Rios and Berta Platas, Caridad Pinheiro, who I know is still writing. But those authors and seeing that those books could sell, and I had a need for it, and there were obviously readers that had a need for it. And it was a pivotal point in my life as an author.
That's wonderful. Thanks so much for sharing, Priscilla. Alexandra?
So my experience was actually similar to Adriana because I was born in Queens, but I was actually raised in Miami. And I grew up in a huge Latinx community. Very few Colombians, though. Like it was mostly Cuban American. So I grew up more on Cuban food than I did with Colombian food. There were more Cuban restaurants than there were Colombian restaurants. Even to this day, my son says he thinks he's more Cuban than he is Colombian. That's another story. So I grew with our shared similar culture, but the Colombianness was really only in my family. And my parents would bring books from Colombia. So I grew up with Rin Rin Renacuajo and like all these Rafael Pombo nursery rhymes from Colombia. And then on the flip side, there was like some sagas and whatnot. But then I would read Sweet Valley Twins, Sweet Valley Highs, Choose Your Own Adventure. There was never this Colombian American girl or similar representation in my stories. It wasn't until Jenny mentioned silent dancing, and that was one of the first ones that I was like, that I devoured, and I was like, wow, I see in the literature anyways, this hyphenated experience. And I remember in college wanting to do my master's thesis on Isabel Allende's House of Spirits, because that was another one that really resonated with me, and being told, no, you can only do that if you go in the Latin American studies, but not in literature. And so there was almost this disconnect of this is okay over there, but not over here as part of this mainstream literature. So it is very wonderful seeing this new rise of middle grades and young adults, and seeing Colombian American authors like Anika Fajardo and Alex Astor. And I'm like, yes, it is very exciting. And I wish I had that as a kid growing up.
I love all your answers. It seems like everyone is pretty much in consensus that they were a little bit older, except maybe you, Alexandra, which you had books actually brought in from Colombia, which that's so nice that you were able to do. Do you feel that as authors, it affected your story writing to be able to not see these stories until you were a little bit older in life? Like you didn't see these stories reflected in youth. I know that earlier, sorry, and I don't remember who said this now, but someone said, that was Priscilla, I think you said that's the first time I saw Latinx represented on the page, and that's when I gave myself the permission to write that. Do you feel like, have you always written Latinx characters, or do you feel like you had to wait a little bit longer in your storytelling journey in order to be able to write your Latinx characters into your stories, if that makes sense?
Do you want anybody? Do you want anybody to jump in, or I wasn't sure.
Go for it.
Oh, did we lose somebody?
Nope.
Okay. Okay. I mean, I think I kind of answered this before, and for me, yes, I just go back to that moment, and it really just solidifies the importance of diversity. I mean, that's why for children that we need diverse books. And then Quanah Jackson, a friend of mine, started also like, we need diverse romance, because I'll speak like within romance in general. To me, I feel like our genre for me now, it speaks of, it gives examples of healthy relationships, right? And the importance of loving relationships, whether it's, like in Anchored Hearts, it's between Alejandro and Ana Maria, but also it's a second chance for Alejandro and his father to kind of come together. So it's, for me, in a genre that celebrates love and healthy relationships, whether it's your partner or in your close community, it's so important for anybody, whether Latinx, whether, Asian, LGBTQ, whatever, to see themselves or someone they love depicted on the pages of those books, finding, in my genre, they're happily ever after, or they're happily for now, if it's a YA romance, right? To me, it's, it just speaks to the importance of why we need to keep pushing. Yes. Was it Jenny that mentioned earlier that, yes, we're seeing more, right? Like every time there's an announcement of a Latinx romance author that sells a book, I'm like, yes, right? So we're seeing more, but we still have a long way to go.
Yeah. And I think, in colleges and universities, there was, like, I can't remember who was saying, but or Alexandra, that there was this, there's this, separation of like Latin American studies and serious literature, right? Because when I started applying to MFA programs, I was writing stories that included my culture, included my traditions, that included stories that I'd grown up hearing, and characters that, were similar to people in my family and people in my life. And I got rejected multiple times with those types of stories. And I just don't think that, MFA programs, serious MFA programs, were wanting those types of stories. They were not considering it serious literature or serious writers. So, then I said, well, screw this. I'm not going to go into that MFA program, and I'll just figure out another way to get better at my craft. And so that's what I did. But my first book is with a young boy named Charlie, and he does present white. There's no talk at all about culture in that first book, but in my head, his mother was always Latina. it doesn't come through in the story, but in my head, his mother is Carmen. She's Latina, Carmen. And, you know, that was me kind of putting it in there anyway, even though it doesn't come across at all, because I was being kind of, I don't know, shown that those stories were not going to be accepted, you know, when I was trying to get my foot in the door. And then after I wrote my first book, I said, haha, you guys let me in. Now I'm going to start writing about this girl named Frenchie Garcia, because my second book is, you know, right in the title, it's Frenchie Garcia. You know, she's a Latina character. But yeah, I think that at first, you know, it was kind of like, once I saw that wasn't being accepted, it definitely kind of made me think, oh, okay, let me rethink, how am I supposed to approach getting into publishing or getting my stories out there? And it did take a while for me to figure that out.
I kind of took a different tact, because for me, in my genres, crime and horror, especially crime, Latina are not necessarily wonderfully represented, are we? Right? You know, you watch any media, we're generally the thugs, we're generally gun holders, and you know, deciding to write crime fiction, I had a lot of concern about being a Puerto Rican writer, writing Puerto Ricans actively engaged in crime. That worried me immensely. So I opted not to. I came in hot, and I wrote Irish. I wrote everyone else. Got in a little trouble. Got the literal feedback, why doesn't he write Puerto Ricans? Which is very interesting. But got my foot in the door kind of the other way, kind of, you know, being a Trojan horse, making people think they were getting one story, and then getting a sort of, you're not getting Puerto Ricans, you're getting a Puerto Rican's perspective of things he's seen. And you're getting, you know, a little something there. And I think a part of it too was a bit of fear in the beginning as well, right? You know, I didn't want to be pigeonholed as the crime writer from the Bronx, you know, who's Puerto Rican, who can get a little lippy, writing Puerto Ricans who can be a little lippy. I was worried about that. Now, though, I don't care. So it's a little different. I've gotten to a good point where I want to write lippy Puerto Ricans, but I want to write these characters from a very different perspective. And I want to write more about, you know, the past decade. I think more people have seen how Puerto Rico has been affected in the last century, when America rolled on in with their Navy and we're like, oh, it's ours now. I think people are beginning to really see for real the effect that that's had on the Puerto Rican people. I'm not an island Puerto Rican either. So even myself seeing what that effect's been to my family and the people that are on the island as a New York Puerto Rican is a very eye-opening situation. So now I want to write about that. I want to write about what the generational trauma of colonization is. I want to write about white Latino guilt. I want to write about these things we don't think about that are there, and we got to confront, especially as, like, I keep seeing it as a white Latino, you know, growing up, having the privileges that I've had, I have to confront those things. I've got to admit to it, because a lot of times white Latinos, we don't do that. We don't admit, you know, we kind of go, we're Latino and we're part of the group, and we're not. You know, we get a lot of things that other folks, Afro-Latino cousins, don't get. So that was where I kind of began to realize, okay, there's a space for me to write these things about myself and my heritage, but there's a different way to do it, and I can do it in a way that's more positive. Whether or not the outside folks get it, it's not my problem. I'm going to try to write for my people and kind of get them to see what I'm trying to put down.
Love it.
I've had someone ask me on a panel one time, if I'm not Latinx, am I really gonna like get your book? And my flat answer, the polite answer, because something else went through my head, was it's if you're a romance reader, it's a romance, right? If you can read a shapeshifter, I think you can read a Latinx romance, you know, right? So their Latinidad is a part of them. It's not all of them, right? It's not a history lesson. Alejandro's papi came over Pedro Pan too, Adriana. Yeah, right. So there's a little bit about that, but it's not a textbook. It's just part of who they are. Just like I'm not just, you know, I'm more than my culture is a big part of it, of who I am. But I feel like and it's we have so many different types of stories, like you just talked about, like the white Latinx. So there's so many shades of different stories within the big Latinx umbrella. I think it's important for all of us to tell them, but it's just part of, in my books anyway, it's part of who they are. If you enjoy romance, you're going to enjoy mine or Alexis Daria's, or or any anything like that.
Adriana,
And I think I think both you, Priscilla, and Angel both bring up a good point, like, of who are we gearing our stories for? Like, it's very hard for me. Like, when I first was drafting the Total Eclipse of Nestor Lopez, he wasn't Nestor. I'm pretty sure I called him Benjamin because he was not Cuban American. But then I looked at my son and I thought, this kid deserves to have books where he gets to be the hero. He gets to have an adventure. He gets to save the day. And so I decided, like you, Priscilla, my culture is who I am. I'm going to put it in my books. But at the same time, I thought, is this still going to be, I don't know the right term, palatable to the general public? But then I thought, no, I don't want my writing, though, to come from that white lens, that non-Cuban lens. I want it to come from, because then it's not coming from me. I'm changing who I am and I didn't want to do that. And so I think that's why I had reacted so strongly when I had read, Nina Moreno and Carlos Hernandez. And then I was like ravenous. I read everything by Margarita Engel and Cristina Gonzalez and all of that. Because it was like those authors had given me permission. They showed me that it's okay to actually write who we are and from our own truth. And so I'm super grateful to them, because I will admit that I was too scared to do that. I thought, no, this isn't what people want from me. This isn't what kids are going to want to read. But seeing how popular those books are, well, yeah, you know what? Kids actually like a lot more than we give them credit for. And so, I think that I was scared at first. So I'm super grateful to the authors who kind of gave me my bravery to really embrace my culture and put it on the page.
So for me, I feel like I've had two different experiences between the novels and the picture books. I started, before I even touched a picture book or even tried writing a picture book, I started with fantasy. That was really what I loved reading, what I loved writing. But with the fantasies that were out there, there was no Latinx representation. And so my very first YA, it was a YA novel, was there's a lot of issues with it, but I do think that one at the heart, one of the biggest issues with, there was no me in that, and nothing from my culture, nothing from my experience, nothing from what it means to revisit this idea of fantasy from a Colombian American perspective. And when it came to the picture books, when I started writing, I couldn't think of writing anything but from my perspective. It was really weird. I don't know that I have a very distinct reason why. Maybe it could be in some way, Adriana, like you, it was because I was reading to my son and I wanted him to see that part of his experience in those books. And I started writing picture books when he was really little, and I would read them to him. And so that was just such a big part. And so my very first stories, just from the beginning, were featuring Colombian American kids. So I feel like that ran my identity, just immediately permeated all the children's books. And then slowly, little by little, I gave myself permission to write the middle grade and older characters into the novels.
I love that. Thank you all so much for sharing your experiences. I feel like we talked about a lot more than just seeing ourselves on the pages when we were younger. And I love that there's this challenge to publishing now, to see us not as a monolith, but as, a very multifaceted group. And I'm wondering, for you all, as writers, how do you balance making demands of your reader while also trying to take care for your readers? Do you find yourself struggling with that a little bit? And can you talk about that?
I'll jump in. For me, as a former educator, I feel like I do think about that a lot when I write, and it mostly comes up when I'm thinking about how I include Spanish in my stories. I put a lot of Spanish in there because that's how I grew up, and I want to make sure that students and kids that don't speak Spanish, everything is still comprehensible. But at the same time, if you are a Spanish speaker, when you're reading, it's not like a character says something in Spanish and then it's immediately translated. So you're actually reading it twice, and that's kind of boring. And so I always try to make sure that everything is clear through context, because that's a skill that students need to have anyways. And my God, these fantasy books that we read that have all these nonsensical made up words that the author has created that we have no problem reading and don't balk at having to try to figure out what they meant. We don't have a problem with that. But the second we come across words or sentences or dialogue in another language, it's like, how am I possibly supposed to understand this? And so I think we don't, we maybe need to try a little harder. And so I always am very adamant about how I present Spanish through context in my books, while still not insulting my readers who are bilingual, so that, the story sounds funny that way. So yeah, there is a balance, because I do want to write to those Latinx kids, those Cuban American kids, but at the same time, I want to write fun adventure stories for all kids. And so I always want to remember, like, who is my true audience that I'm gearing things towards.
I'm a lot like you, Adriana, trying to use context clues, because, and I've had someone ask me, like, how do you know when to drop the Spanglish? And the first time somebody asked me that, I actually pulled back, because I realized it just comes out, like the same way my mom and I are cooking in the kitchen, and she's like, hey, dame eso from the microwave, right? Like, we just switch it and we know. So the books that I've written, the characters have all been fluent in Spanish. I have not written one where they're not a Latinx character that doesn't. So I try, but the same way, like, I don't say something in Spanish and then think it in English in my head. So I try to do, like, in conversation, right? Like, two sisters are fighting and one says cállate la boca, and the next one, her response then, so that I don't want the reader to, like, run off to Google to, and get pulled away from the book. The response that the next one's going to say, don't tell me to shut my mouth, or I can say whatever I want, right? So that the reader who doesn't know what cállate la boca means, they can get it from the next line. I will say, and my publisher has been great about not questioning anything. Only one time has something in Spanish or something cultural been questioned. And that is, in one of my books, like, right, in Puerto Rico, we say coño all the time, right? You stub your toe, coño, it means damn. Or your girlfriend walks in and she looks good, you're like, coño, girl, you're looking, right? So we use it all the time. But it does not mean that in Spain and European Spanish. It means something totally different. And my editor didn't know what it means, because I was not using context clues with that. I just dropped it, like how I use it. And so he Googled it. And when I got my revisions back, the track change was, are you sure you want to use this word? Google. And I was like, yeah. So when I Googled it and I saw what it means, and this is for the library, so I'm not going to say what it means here. I real quickly, so I just had to figure out, like, the first time Diego says coño, then he stops and he's like, no, this is a double damn situation or something like that. Like, immediately, I didn't even wait for the next, like, character, because I really didn't want someone going off to Google for that. But typically, like you, Adriana, I want all readers to read my books, yes. But I would be lying if I didn't say, like, the reader that I'm really, really thinking about is the reader like me, who the very first time she picked up an Encanto, was like, these are my people, right? And so that's the reader that I'm thinking about. And so, yes, there's Spanish, yes, there's, or Spanglish, because my hope is someone who is Latinx, even if they're not, Cuban, like the Navarros, or Puertorriqueñas, like the Fernandez sisters in my other series. I want them to finish the book and feel like they had a little bit of home. And if they're not Latinx, then I hope you finish with a little bit of appreciation for their culture and the values and what it brings to their lives. So that's kind of my ultimate goal with my books.
I think I do a lot of the balancing also with the language, and especially for the little ones. When I write the stories, I don't really think about it. I mean, in my head, the characters are like my son, or like me as a kid. But as I'm revising, I really do try to weave in those context clues. But also, I have the added benefit of amazing illustrators who are illustrating the stories, and so I know there is in the new book, there's the word colibri, and there is no context to what kind of bird, just that it's some kind of bird, and then hopefully with the illustrations and the combination. But with that one, especially with the recent book, it's all about a girl who's learning, who's going to school and doesn't know how to speak English. It was my experience of going to school in New York and not knowing how to speak English. And so the Spanish is just such an integral part of who she is that I can't sugarcoat that. I can't change that. That is part of who she is. So even in the translation, even in the English with the Spanish, it has to come across. And I know that I've included, I don't like the repeating precisely for the same reasons that you said, Adriana. I don't like that repetition. I do include a glossary, and I know that that's kind of hit or miss, but for the little ones, I do like including that. That's almost kind of like my way of saying, okay, here's a glossary, but I won't do the pronunciation guide. And I think about it when I learned reading through the reading and the ways that words sound. And to this day, there's words that I pronounce differently because of just how I heard them in my head. But I will never forget a comment that I got of saying, oh, well, yeah, there's a glossary, but there's no pronunciation guide. I'm like, well, you can Google that, right? It is out there. The most important part here is the meaning, if you can get it within, and if the kid is getting it, and we're good.
When I was editing Pa que tú lo sepas, one of the challenges I gave the writers is kind of, let's not think about an outside audience. Let's pretend that you're writing the story for you. I want you to just be unabashedly you. I want you to dig into your culture, however you want to. And part of that was, we're not italicizing Spanish. You use it at your leisure. I don't care about context. Just write these stories as true as possible. If there are issues, we'll get to them in editing. I was very fortunate. There were no issues. But the two stories that always stuck out to me, we had a writer, Hector Acosta, a Mexican writer who wrote a phenomenal story called Turistas, it was just liberal Spanish. It was a story based in Mexico with outsiders involved. And he just did such a beautiful job weaving the confusion of a different language to people's ears. And he really played with that idea. And I love that he did that because it was a really good example of what the reader would be experiencing if they know nothing about Mexican Spanish itself. This is and they're as confused as the characters. Excellent. And we wanted that emotion to come out of them. And another writer, Jessica Lane, a Peruvian writer, wrote a story about a Peruvian folklore monster that I knew nothing about. And for me, as just an outsider, she just wrote it. She gave me no context, but it was wonderful to discover the folklore through her story, because at the end I got satisfaction, but it was just this wonderful moment of, wow, she did not go out of her way to make me feel comfortable. She didn't give me a deep exposition dump or some historical background. She just threw it in my face, made me ride it, be uncomfortable until I was finally comfortable. And going through that experience made me a fan of that, especially as a Latina writer. You're saying, you know what, maybe sometimes it's fun to kind of just throw folks into the water and make them go, what are you talking about? Until finally, okay. And they can finally, either they love it or hate it at the end. But if they can have the aha moment, I'm kind of hoping for now. And especially now as I'm writing new projects, I'm getting a lot more deeply ingrained in cultural background of Puerto Rico, especially kind of looking into the folklore of Puerto Rico. I'm getting obsessed with Gigante, all these different things that part of me says, well, let's not give as much explanation as we would normally get, and let folks discover.
Yeah, as far as making demands, I think with language and with content, the things that we're writing about, most of the readers that are coming to our books and readers in general are pretty open-minded. I write for teenagers, and I find them to be one of the most open-minded groups. I don't see them having a problem with, me putting Spanish in there. They're exactly the type who'll be like, oh, what's that? And look it up real quick on their phone. Takes about 5 or 10 seconds, So I have, I've always approached it like I don't mind making demands on my readers. I don't mind throwing that stuff in there and being like, they can figure it out, that they're capable, and they always are looking for, like context clues and all that kind of stuff. So and with subject matter too, because I write about difficult subjects. I'm writing about 3 migrants whose lives are in danger. And, the subject is harsh. It's difficult to read about, but it's got to be put out there. So I do make demands on my readers. I've found that most of my readers are okay with that. And, I respect and feel that they're capable of handling those things. And as far as taking care of them, I just, for a young adult audience, I always do need to put some glimmer of hope in my stories, even though they deal with harsh issues, even though they're difficult reads. There's always got to be a little bit of hope at the end, because I think for young readers, that's very important.
I love that. I love that we're ending on a note of hope. So I know some of the viewers might be potential authors, and I want to ask you guys either the best bit of writing advice you've ever gotten, or the best blog or Instagram or Facebook page or whatever, like where you get your best writing advice from. Anyone that wants to go and jump in?
Oh, we're all so quiet. Okay, so I know that this might seem really silly, right? But when I started on this journey of writing, and I kept getting rejected by the freaking MFA program, and I kept feeling like that door was closing in my face, and how do I become a better writer if nobody will show me how to become a better writer, and all of that kind of stuff. I kept talking to my husband like, man, I just want to write. How do I do this? And I talk about writing, I buy books about writing and all that. He's like, Jen, produce. He's like, you have to produce the work. Just keep producing, just keep producing, just keep producing. And I was like, yeah, he's right. Like, if I just sit here and I complain about it and I waste my energy on that, then I'm not going to produce the work. So that kind of became my mantra, like produce. I just kept telling myself, just keep writing. This will go somewhere. Maybe the door isn't through an MFA program. Maybe the door is elsewhere, but just keep writing, because you're going to get better at your craft that way. So my advice to writers is write. It's right. Yes, find community. Yes, go to the workshops. Yes, go to the retreats. Yes, do the Google searches on whatever, but write. Take the time to sit down and write the work and produce it.
I'm going to piggyback on that one, actually, because I think this one's the other flip side to that. Or part of it really is there isn't really one right way to write. And I know that there's a lot of, well, you got to write every single day. You got to write for X amount of days. But if you're balancing a job, if you're balancing little kids, if you're balancing a bunch of other things, what that looks for you is probably going to be a little different than that looks, which is also another one I like, is keep your eyes on your own journey. You got to be true to yourself and your journey and what you have at your disposal at the moment. What matters most is that you keep producing. However you can.
I think it's for me, when I was starting, one of the biggest struggles I had was whether or not I should use my name. A lot of times as a Latinx author, Luis Colón isn't necessarily something that rolls off the tongue. There's an accent in there. It confuses people. It worries them. Every first impression I get, people are very surprised when I open my mouth. It's like a dog is talking to them because they expected something different. So I was terrified, And over learning that, I tell a lot of new authors, don't be afraid to be you. Don't be afraid about the first impression. If your name is exotic, own that. It doesn't matter. If your content is different, it doesn't matter. If you're writing from where you're from, that's what matters. And we need that, especially when it comes to marginalized writers. We need to write where we're from. The other bit of advice, I think Michaela Cole this week won an Emmy, and she talked about writing afraid, writing what you're scared of. And I always tell people that's important. And I've had people kind of compound that and say, not just write what you're afraid of, write while you're afraid. Write when you're afraid to write when you're not sure of yourself, write the things you're not sure of writing about, write how you're not sure of writing. It'll strengthen you. And, I found a lot of inspiration in that, and kind of taking those risks and being unafraid to be yourself, being unafraid to try new things. If you've never done third person, try third person. If you've never done past tense, try past tense. Challenge yourself. And like Jenny said, you got to keep writing. You got to just keep doing it, and you'll get there. You'll get what you're looking for.
I think for me, it's a kind of like a combination. I don't want to repeat the same thing, but yes, it like to be a writer, you have to write. You also, like to Alexandra's point, is find your process. I think two key things is to be a reader, right? I tell my students, like in my romance class, the number of students that take my class that say, I've never read a romance, but I want to write one. And I'm happy they're there, because so they can start learning about, the craft of writing and the genre itself. But I always do say, you need to read as well, like within your genre, but also just be well read, because you'll learn from the books that do move you, those books that make it on your keeper shelf. Study those. What is it about them that grabs you? The books that don't make it on your keeper shelf, study those. What is it that just didn't sit with you, or just didn't resonate with you? So you don't do that in your writing, or you figure out, maybe then you start thinking about what you would have done differently. And I would say probably the teacher in me, right? There's classes, there's workshops, there's how-to books. You want to be honing your craft. But to also Alexandra's point is, you could come and take my class, you could come and take someone else's class. What works for me might not work for you. So if you're sitting in a workshop and someone says, this is how you can plot, maybe that's how you can plot. And if it works for you, great. But maybe it's something that you need to tweak because you're trying to figure out your process, right? If it's so yes, you want to be honing your craft. I think those three things, you want to be honing your craft because by learning, by writing, and by reading. So your homework tonight is to go read.
That's my favorite kind of homework. I think for me, it's, and I think everyone has alluded to this, there's a great measure of self-acceptance in being a writer and learning how you work. And for me, I've really had to dive into how my brain works, because there was the way I thought I was supposed to be writing. I thought we were all supposed to either be sitting in silence, or we were sitting in cafes or bookstores writing. My brain can't tolerate that at all, because I have a very healthy measure of ADHD. And so I have to watch television when I am writing. It's something that I may or may not tell students when I do school visits, because their teachers would hate me forever and ever. But that's what my brain needs to be productive, to be able to do all that producing, that Jenny is telling us we need to do. So there was a big part of me that had to accept that was okay. That the fact that I was an author who sat on her couch with a laptop while I was watching Supernatural, but I still wrote a book, like that was all right. And so you just have to accept what works for you. And it doesn't matter if that's not what works for anyone else.
Like someone staring out the window, that could be part of their process, right? So like physically getting words on the page, yes, but also part of my process is like pacing in my backyard and going over the scene that I'm working on till it's like a little movie here, and then I can sit down. So again, I've taken Becca Syme is a strengths coach, and so she has like a Better Faster Academy, but a couple of classes like Strengths for Writers, and part of what she talks about, like one of her key lines is question the premise. So someone tells you, oh, that's not the way that's not going to work, or this is what you need to do for to finish your book. Maybe I might need to do that, but maybe not, right? So it's all about, ultimately you want to get words on the page, because like Jenny said, you want to produce, right? But also learn that what is your process to help you get those words on the page. And what I could not be watching Supernatural, right? But I listen to a lot of music. I listen to a lot of salsa and merengue and bachata. And so I take a lot of dance breaks, and that is part of my writing process. Those dance breaks are important.
You could be a weirdo like me and bake, which is what I started doing during pandemic. So now I bake while I write. Yeah.
That's amazing. I love this. I love everyone's inspiration and how like diverse it is. And, I like that you ultimately make time to be inspired as well. So I appreciate that. I know we're coming up to the hour, and I don't know if everyone has their books and wants to hold them up real quick before we say goodbye, and just kind of show everyone their books if you have them, and say goodbye to everyone. I want to thank everyone for coming here, and thank Alexandra, Angel, Jenny, Adriana, and Priscilla. Thank you all so much for your time. And I hope everyone has a good night. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so
Thank
much.
you, Carmen. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks for watching. Subscribe to our YouTube channel to be the first to find out when we have new fun and informative videos for you. Orange County Library System is your place to learn, grow, connect.